All right, good evening. Welcome to UPARS Los Angeles. This is May 16, 2017. We have a very special guest with us tonight. His name is Preston Dennett. I'll read a little bit about him. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986, when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's a field investigator for MUFON. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of more than 20 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, the MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, and Mystery Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He has appeared on numerous radio television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. He's also been on Jimmy Church. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he's lectured all across the United States. He currently resides in Reseda, California. Would you please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Preston Dennett.
All right, thank you very much. I'm honored and delighted to speak for you guys. My name is Preston Dennett, and like Steve said, I've been researching since 1986. Finding out that UFOs were real was not good news for me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe my family was keeping these secrets from me. My coworkers, my friends. Had to change my whole worldview. Got really obsessed with this subject. Started writing articles and books. I joined MUFON, all the other UFO groups I could find. Subscribed to all the magazines. Bought all the books, started hunting UFOs, and kind of never looked back. I've written quite a bit on this subject. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of my books before I actually begin. This is the first thing I actually wrote about UFOs. This involved a number of sightings in Topanga Canyon. This was way back in 1989 when this was published. It would be a few years later there would be a huge wave of sightings there. This was my first actual book, UFO Healings, which Steve mentioned. It covers 100 cases of UFO healings. It's now out of print. I found 100 more cases, so I'm putting together another book on this. This is the first book I wrote about UFO encounters where people I've interviewed myself. This is mostly my friends, my family, my co-workers, their encounters. This book actually never made it into bookstores. This is UFOs over Topanga Canyon, about a wave of sightings in 1992 to 1994. This is a book about what were my 10 most extensive cases up to that time. I wrote UFOs over California and started doing a whole series of books about various states. This is the Coronado Island UFO incident, which I co-wrote with Mike Evans. I wrote a children's book about UFOs because so many kids are having sightings and are not believed by their parents. UFOs over New York, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona. Colorado is coming out later this year. And this book is called Not From Here. I have written over 100 articles, and they were just kind of sitting there and not available to the public, so I put them together in this book. I'm going to talk a little bit about this one tonight and this one, Volume 2, which are mostly about the stranger aspects of UFO contact, the details you don't hear a lot about. But what I really want to talk about tonight is this book. This is my latest book. It's called Inside UFOs, and it's about people who've had very extensive contact with UFOs or extraterrestrials. I do believe that that's what we're dealing with here is extraterrestrials. I know there are other theories, everything from demonic to angelic, and time travelers possibly. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit. I do think they have the ability to do time travel. But I still can't get away from the extraterrestrial theory. I think it's the one that best fits the evidence. And this book covers 10 cases of people who've had either missing time, face-to-face contact, or in most cases, onboard experiences. And many of the other books I've written have been drawn from a wide research net, borrowing cases from a number of different researchers and newspaper articles and things like this. But this book is completely my own research, so I'm super excited about it. These are cases you've never heard before unless you actually know the witness. And I'll just dive right into it. This is Kevin Canning. I met him in San Diego after speaking about the Coronado Island incident. And I had shown a drawing of an ET on the projector. And he's like, ooh, that's very close to what I saw. And he told me his story. I've since interviewed him many times. He's a great witness. He is a medic, Navy Corpsman. And back in 1981, he was stationed on this ship in the Philippines. And he had a best friend named Larry. That's a pseudonym. And Larry was the personnel clerk. But they became very good friends. And one day Larry comes out of the blue and says, you know, Kevin, I'm a contactee. I've been in contact with aliens my whole life. They used to pick me up from our farm in Indiana. They take me aboard their ship all the time. They take me to their planet and other planets. Kevin's like, he believed in UFOs. He had written a paper about UFOs as a child. So he always believed in this stuff. But to hear his friend telling him that, he's had all these experiences, he just couldn't believe it. Well, Larry comes back a few days later, mind you, they're still out at sea in the Philippines, and says, I just went to your house. And Larry proceeds to describe all these details in Kevin's house that are absolutely accurate. He said he described the make of the car, the type of rug they had, all kinds of details down to the tiniest detail, except there was one strange thing. All these details were about 10, maybe 15 years in the past. So it appeared as if Larry had time traveled or something. That was the only explanation he could come up with. And this sort of out of time aspect really upset Kevin more than the story itself. But he was intrigued. He's like, okay, Larry, if this is true, I want to meet your little green friends. And Larry said, okay, I'll see what I can do. So a couple of days later, Larry comes into the cabin and he's like, okay, they're going to come tomorrow. They said, okay, we're going to pick you up and you can go for a ride. And Kevin's like, okay. He's not believing it. The next day comes and Larry pops into the cabin. He's like, they're here. They're right up on deck. Go up and you'll see them. Their cabin was not far from the deck. It was during lunchtime, day. And Kevin says, okay. He goes up on deck, not really expecting to see anything. But when he arrives on deck, he sees it instantly. Their ship is about 600 feet long. It's a Navy ship. And he sees this craft right alongside the ship. It's much larger than the ship, at least 3 times, possibly significantly larger. Absolutely beautiful, he said. It was stunningly beautiful, covered with colored lights, and just gorgeous. Sitting there in perfect silence. And he does what everyone should do when you see a UFO, which is get another witness. And he runs to the nearest person, sees the mess cook, and starts grabbing his shoulder and shaking him, and can't get his attention. Next thing he knows, he's not on the Navy ship anymore. He's apparently inside this object, because he's looking down at the Navy ship from above, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and he's completely freaking out. He's thinking, okay, I'm AWOL. And he hears a voice in his head, no, you're not. They don't even know you're gone. And he says, oh my God, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And he hears another telepathic voice. He says, well, isn't this what you wanted? This is what you asked for. And so he's still completely freaking out. He's too afraid to turn around. He's standing next to the wall of this object, and he can see through it. And wherever he looks, it turns telepathic, or transparent. And he pinches his hand to see if this is real, to the point where he actually bleeds. And he decides, yes, I'm really on this ship. He looks down, he can see sort of a metal grid work. But he's looking out the side of the ship when it suddenly moves very quickly, and he recognizes instantly where he's at. He's in his hometown in Kankakee, Illinois. It's daytime, so this is impossible because it was daytime where he was. It should be night there. So again, there's this weird time travel aspect. And here's where it gets really strange. This ship hovers right over his mom's churchyard where she's teaching. And he can see through the UFO, through the wall of the church, into the classroom where his mom is writing on the chalkboard. And he's thinking, okay, what's going on? This is weird. When the UFO travels a couple of blocks away to where his dad works in a bank building, same thing, he can see through the UFO, through the building, past all the ductwork and the air conditioning and the electrical, to the very center of the building, where his dad is having a meeting with executives. And he's wondering, why are you showing me this when he hears a voice in his head. It was English, male, sounded no particular accent, but very clear speaking. Said, your parents did a good job. They are very honorable people and did a good job. And he's thinking, okay, does not know why they were showing him this. And he told me honestly, he may have forgotten some of what happened because a lot went on. Next thing he knows, there was a ship, and he's looking down through the bottom of the UFO, and he sees what looks like desert, gray sand, and he sees craters, and he's thinking, gosh, is this a bombing range? What is this? The more he looks at it, it starts to look like the moon. He's thinking, oh my God. And suddenly this ship comes over the horizon, and there's the Earth, way off in the background, the size of a softball. And he says he actually nearly messed his pants. Not the word he used, but he says he could not believe what he was seeing. And this is the point where he started to get the courage to talk to these guys. And he asked them, who are you guys? Where are you from? And this is where it became very interesting. The room changed size. This is something I've heard not a whole lot, really, very rarely, in fact, but a number of people have told me that when they're taken on board a UFO, it actually changes size. One gentleman noticed this. He had an experience in North Carolina and was able to ask the ETs about it. He says, how big is this UFO? It seems to be changing size. And they told him, well, it's as big as we need it to be. So there are a lot of cases like this. I wrote a chapter about this in my book, Not From Here, in which people have seen UFOs, gone inside them, and they're much vaster, much larger on the inside than they are on the outside. And other people have seen these UFOs actually shrink down. This happened to Betty Andreasen. She saw a person get abducted, taken into the UFO, and that UFO was shrunk down to a tiny little thing. So these ETs have an incredible power of technology over space, which is very linked to time. So I think that's what we're seeing here. And there's one case from Leonard Stringfield, in which he interviewed a military officer who was taken to a military base to photograph a UFO. He was a metaller, specialized in photographing metal. And he photographed the outside of the UFO, which was about 30 feet wide, and they told him to photograph the inside, and it was much, much larger on the inside than on the outside. So large, he said you couldn't have thrown a rock and hit the other side. So this is what happened with Kevin. He's thinking, oh my God, as the room is expanding in size, it darkens. It was originally like 20 feet, it expanded to a couple of 100 feet in size, and it turned into a star chart, three-dimensional. You could see our solar system, the sun, our planet, and all these stars stretching out way off into the distance, and way off the very other side of the room was this little red light blinking. And they said, that's us. At this point, he proceeded to ask questions very rapidly, and they answered before he could even think them. They told him that they eat normal foods. He asked, are you going to eat me? They said no. They eat fruits and vegetables, and fish, and things like this. They told him they speak all the languages of our planet. They told him that they are trading with all the major governments. They said that there are many other ET races also visiting our planet and trading with our governments. He asked them about God, and he says they got nervous and said, we don't discuss race, religion, or politics. Which I found really interesting, because these are issues we seem to struggle quite a bit with on our planet. They told him that when we exploded nuclear bombs back in the 40s, it caused a lot of attention to be paid to us, not only from them, but from all the other ET races, and that they all came rushing in to see what was going on, and that our messing around with nuclear bombs has started what amounts to a countdown clock. They didn't explain exactly what that meant, but they took him to the side of the ship and they showed him a three-dimensional, wasn't sure if it was a window or actually looking out or a film, but it looked absolutely real. And they showed him all these disasters taking place. They said, because of what we've done with nuclear power, this is going to happen. And they showed him several hurricanes, they showed him earthquakes, they showed him tornadoes, landslides, they showed him a mining disaster, they showed him a personal motorcycle accident that he would have in like 20 years, which actually did end up happening. And they wouldn't really elaborate on that, other than to say that these disasters will happen and that our destiny will be fulfilled. At some point, he asked about Roswell, and they did say yes, Roswell did occur. He asked many other questions. He says, honestly, he doesn't remember it all. Some of it's still coming back to him. At some point, he did ask, what do you look like? And they said, well, we're not little, and we're not green. He's like, okay, well, and they said, well, our appearance sometimes frightens people. And so finally, he decided to just turn around and take a look at what these guys look like. And this is obviously not them, but they were praying mantis-type ETs. What he saw were 3 marble chairs, or white marble, it looked like thrones, with a very high round back. They were not facing him. As soon as he turned around, they swung around to face him, and on each chair was a praying mantis-type figure. He said that they were milky white in color, long, thin limbs, and had eyeballs the size of basketballs, that our head would fit inside one of their eyeballs. So they absolutely oozed intelligence. It radiated off of them, and he felt like a little bug next to them, ironically. One of them stands up and takes 2 steps across the room, and he's right next to Kevin. Kevin sees that there's a console there. The console is very plain looking, he says. It had like what looked like oven dials, and amber lights, and green lights, and yellow lights. It was overall pretty plain. And he's looking up at this figure, and he says it was 15 feet tall. And I said, no, you're probably, you were frightened. Because, most people I talk to, they see something 9, 10 feet tall tops. I've heard a little bit taller, but never 15. But he says, no, they were more than twice my height. He's almost 6 feet tall. He says it was like standing next to a basketball board, and they were taller than that. So they were absolutely enormous. And he sticks by his 15-foot tall estimate, and he's a trained observer, by the way. So he became really frightened at this point because it was so close to him, and it turned to him and asked him, well, would you like to go to our planet? And he said no. He wanted to go home. He was afraid of being a specimen. And so they reached out, grabbed his shoulder, and that caused an electric shock of just panic. He fainted. And he woke up, and he was back on the ship. Not on the deck, he was back in his room, lying in bed, sweating profusely, almost screaming, hyperventilating. He calmed down for just maybe less than a minute, when the curtain whips open, and there's his friend Larry. And Larry's grinning from ear to ear and says, so, how was your ride? Well, Kevin was not happy. He was very traumatized at this point and didn't want to talk about it, and actually broke up his friendship over this incident. He regrets it now. But he was not ready to deal with this and was really upset. And what's very interesting is by the next day, most of this had faded from his memory. He remembered being taken on board. He did not remember what they looked like. He didn't remember any messages he was given. Just some fleeting images here and there. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when he's at home and he sees this nature show about praying mantises, and they do a close-up, and this breaks down the wall of amnesia. I call this a cue. It's something I've seen in many other cases where someone sees something or experiences something that reminds them of the original incident that is shrouded in amnesia and brings it all back. So that's what happened to him. It's a great case. He thinks now he may have been examined or implanted. He initially did not believe that. But he was on that ship, he estimates, for about 2 hours or less. But a very interesting case, and a great guy. He's very vocal about speaking about his experiences. The next case I want to talk about is a gentleman I call Taylor. He is now a chiropractor. Back in 1964, when he was 11 years old in St. Louis, Missouri, his mom sent him out to mail a letter at the local store, which was about 2 blocks away. He mails the letter, he's walking back, it's 9 p.m., and suddenly he sees this object drop down out of the sky right over him. And he looks up, he's never thought of UFOs at this point. He sees this round object with a metallic bottom, and the street has no traffic on it at all, which is, again, something I hear quite a bit. And next thing he knows, about an hour has passed, and the light's gone, the ship's gone, and he's walking home. But he feels strangely different. He says he feels absolutely mentally aware. He feels almost enlightened, like he's much smarter, like he can think faster, like he's totally spiritually enlightened. This is a detail I've also heard several times. One gentleman told me as he was driving through the mountains with a friend, this UFO dropped down and followed their car, and as it did so, he became more aware than he's ever been in his life. So people use different ways to describe this, but there's something about being close to these things that sometimes brings a whole new type of awareness. And he experienced that. He was failing in school at this time. He instantly rose to the top of the class. He got home. His mom was furious. She did not want to hear about the light or the object. She wanted to know why her 11-year-old boy was on the street for over an hour. He didn't tell her what happened. Over the next few days, he recalled what happened during this missing time. He recalled when the light struck him, he suddenly found himself aboard this craft, presumably. It was very clean, soft pastel colors. There were 3 men standing there, and they were human-looking. They had long, shoulder-length blonde hair. They were wearing, not quite like this, but like black jumpsuits with sort of a white stripe on them, boots, and had very handsome features, and all looked very close to identical. And they proceeded to have a long philosophical conversation, which he says for the life of him, he just can't remember. But it was this incident that sparked a lifelong series of encounters in his life. His family moved out of St. Louis into the countryside, and he immediately started having encounters with gray-type ETs. Often they'd be shrouded in screen memories like deer, usually. One very interesting incident occurred when the whole family rushed outside to see this UFO, a typical metallic saucer. It must have been 50 feet away, colored lights around it, and he decides he's going to rush inside to get his rifle, not to shoot at the UFO, but to look at it through the scope and get a close-up view. He runs outside with the rifle, sees the UFO, points it at the UFO to look through it and can't find it, brings the gun down, and this is when he notices something very strange. His mom is frozen in place, as is his dad, who's carrying a bucket of water or milk, and it's sloshing over the side, but it's frozen. All his family is frozen. Birds in the sky are frozen, the trees, everything, but not him. So this completely freaks him out, and he's running around trying to figure out how this can possibly be. When he turns to the front yard and sees that the UFO has landed, actually, in his yard, and there are 3 grays getting out and walking towards him. And that's all he remembers. But as time passed, as he grew up, he would have these missing time encounters and started having fully conscious encounters. On one occasion, he had this boil appear on his cheek, and he's joking with his wife. He says, maybe it's an implant, and maybe we should have it removed. And she just laughed. That night, the ETs came in, took him aboard. He fully remembers this consciously, and they told him, "This is ridiculous. You have gone through far too many implants." And he's like, "Oh, that was an implant? I was just joking." And they're like, no, this is no joke. Now you know about it, and we're going to have to take it out. And we're going to put a new one in a place you'll never find it. What they told him. He had lost an implant as a child. He remembered it falling out of his nose. So he's always felt watched. He's always felt like he was being followed and tracked. And got to the point where he's able to converse with these guys on a pretty regular basis. On one occasion, he became very curious how they moved through solid walls. And they demonstrated it for him twice. On another occasion, he became curious about how they are able to carry humans when their craft are darting around at right angles. And they said, well, here's how we do it. We'll show you. And they took him on board into a room where there was just one chair. This illustration is from Betty Andreasen's book. But he described something that was very, very similar to what she's described. He said there was this large plastic-looking chair, maybe acrylic, and they told him to sit down in it, and the second part of the chair came down from above and encased him, and the chair filled up with liquid, and they told him, breathe the liquid. It's okay, breathe the liquid. He resisted, as understandably, but found out he had no choice. He breathed it in and found out he was able to breathe this liquid. And they told him that this is how they are able to carry humans on their ships. So he's continuing to have contact. When he met his wife, she was skeptical, and he says, well, you won't be. Give it a month, give it 2 months. You're going to see UFOs. And she did. I interviewed her as well. She's had encounters herself. They've woken up with strange scars and bruises and things like this, but have come to accept this phenomena and don't feel like it's a harmful influence in their life. The next case I want to talk about is, I call him William Trimble. He told me not to use his real name. He's currently a professor at a college in the Midwest. This was back in 1961. He was 12 years old, and this is not him, actually. Just so you know, this is just a slide of a paperboy. And he was 12 years old. He was a paperboy, and he would deliver papers in this small town in Texas. And one morning at around 4 a.m., he didn't enjoy being a paperboy, but he did his job good. Woke up to do his normal morning route, reached the top of the hill when he saw this light. And it came swooping down from the horizon and came right over him. He was very interested in planes, has always been interested in planes, and could instantly see that this was no plane. It was just a big, bright light. No running lights, no strobes, nothing like that. And it was right over his head. And he was becoming alarmed when suddenly it flashed a beam of light on him. And next thing he knows, it's no longer 4 a.m., it's like 7 a.m., it's light outside. He's freaking out. He runs and starts delivering his papers to a bunch of very angry customers. When he gets home, his mom's furious, the boss is calling, wants to know what's going on. And he doesn't tell them. He just says he's tired, and like he normally does, he just goes to bed after his route for a couple of hours. Well, the next day, he was even more tired. And in the week that followed, he got so tired to the point where he could not get out of bed. He was very sick, and they rushed him off to the hospital, and the hospital was not able to diagnose him. He made no mention of being struck by a beam of light from a UFO. Most of the people I've talked to who rushed off to the hospital for an incident like this don't tell the doctors whether it's an injury or a healing that they believe it was caused by a UFO. He wasn't even thinking UFO at this point. It wasn't until much later he realized, this is probably what happened to me. His illness lasted for almost a year, where he was so weak he could not get out of bed. He was excused from all physical activities, lost a lot of friends, but was able to do a lot of reading, and eventually recovered. The doctors gave him a vitamin cocktail, that was all they could do. And he fully recovered, grew up, and as he grew up he realized, this was probably a UFO, I wonder if I was abducted. And he remembered as a child, before this incident, there was this weird incident in the family where he woke up on the second story of his bedroom and saw a little man floating outside his window. He says all he remembers was it had strange eyes and it was bald. He screams, and his sisters come running, they verified this, and by the time they get there, the little man's gone. And then he started having nightmares about his daughter, who was 5 years old, who would come running into his bedroom and look at him. And he's like, why are these nightmares so frightening? This is just my daughter. Until one day, this 5-year-old daughter comes running into the room in his dream, in his nightmare, and it's not his daughter, it's a Frankenstein alien-type creature. And so these nightmares got worse, and he finally decided he's going to go under hypnosis. Only 2 of the cases in this book involve hypnosis. I'm a strong supporter of hypnosis. I think it absolutely does work. I think it's been proven to work. But I generally don't recommend it unless someone's having anxiety. He was. Or if they're just dead set on finding out. I probably would. If I had missing time, I'm going under hypnosis. So he finally did. But at this point, he had read a number of UFO books. And the hypnotist who was experienced in the subject said, there's a strong possibility that you're going to be making some of this up or drawing it from what you read. But he decided to go ahead with it anyway. And under hypnosis, he recalled seeing not what he actually expected, which was a typical gray, but something that was more yellowish in color, very tall, willowy, otherwise very typical of how we think of grays, with large eyes and a large head. And he says there were others there. They were much smaller and they were kind of greenish and bluish in color. And he says it was extremely frightening. All they were doing was examining him, but it was so disorienting and so frightening that he kept passing out. And that didn't really remember much other than that. One interesting result of his experiences, now he says he's very interested in hands-on healing. And he somehow connects to that experience, which I find very interesting because this turns up, again, case after case. The next case I want to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Stan Hughes. He's a full-blooded blood Indian from the Seneca tribe in Canada. He's since become a great friend, a really neat guy, a teacher, a professor. And let's see, this was back in 1992, but he was with his family, where he went to Lake Pend Oreille, which is on the upper Idaho panhandle. And they would go there regularly and watch these UFOs dart around. But this one time in 1992, he's up there, and usually there's 4 or 5 lights. There was like 10 or more this time. And usually they're way up there, but one comes dropping down out of the sky to eye level about 50 feet away, when his daughter suddenly shouts out, "Daddy, Daddy, they're talking to me." And he's like, oh, okay. She says, "What do I say?" He says, "Tell them you love them." And so she says in her sweet little voice, "I love you." And this object flares up very bright blue, comes swooping down towards them, over their heads, and off into the distance. So these are the kind of encounters he's had, which are very friendly. On another occasion, he was camping at Thunder Mountain, in the same general area, and this UFO shows up, and it starts getting really close to him, and he feels this wave of fear. It goes back, and the fear subsides, it comes closer, and he feels this wave of fear again. And he's thinking, what's going on here? Finally he realizes, after the 3rd or 4th time, that it's trying to warn him about something, but he can't figure out what it is. And eventually the object goes away, and when he gets home, he discovers that his family is in crisis. His son, who had been having severe emotional problems, was having a major episode, and he now feels like this UFO was trying to warn him. He calls the ETs the Wojay, or star people, and feels like these are his ancestors. And I've talked to a number of Native Americans, and they seem to have a friendlier encounters than the average person. Certainly it's true for him. On another occasion, the same son was having a Native American healing ceremony because traditional methods weren't working for him. He was still very depressed. They went to Priest Lake, this is up in Washington, and, no, I'm sorry, it was Sullivan Lake, and did a Native American healing ceremony with him. And after this healing ceremony was done, this UFO shows right up over the group of about 30 people as if to celebrate the healing ceremony. He says it was a metallic saucer, had little lights all around it, and it was so close it was actually making the trees shake, and you could hear it humming. And he thought, oh, we're here to celebrate the healing ceremony with us. So he's had a number of encounters like this, but his absolute, hands-down best encounter occurred in 1997. He was again at Thunder Mountain, camping out, and was driving, after camping, it was early morning, he was driving down this dirt road at the base of the mountain. His dog is in the seat next to him, he's in a pickup, and suddenly he starts to feel strangely sedate or tranquilized, and he pulls over, and he hears this whooshing noise, and this giant silver sphere comes over his car and lands on the road in front of him. He says it was like chrome, it was like a mirror, absolutely beautiful and about the size of a large room. Covered the whole road, and as soon as it stops, this door opens, and out steps this very handsome Nordic ET, a humanoid. He said it looked absolutely human. It had dark features, Arabic perhaps, or Middle Eastern, shoulder-length hair, a very kind face, blue suit and silver boots. And he says it was the most handsome man he's ever seen. This Nordic steps out of the UFO and walks up to the front of his car, kind of holding up his hand, and Stan says he just becomes absolutely suffused with longing, just overwhelmed with this feeling like, I want to go with you, please take me with you, take me with you. And the man's smile drops, his hand drops, he gets this very sad look in his eyes, kind of just shakes his head imperceptibly, turns around and goes back into the ship, which takes off. Stan, at this point, he just started crying, became overcome with sadness. He never fell asleep, he never woke up. This was an almost full waking consciousness, but it was slightly different, he said. He did feel strangely entranced, but it wasn't a dream. This is his closest encounter to date. He's hoping for another one. He has no idea why this figure would just drop down out of the sky just to say hello, which seemed like what it was doing. But there are a number of cases in the literature just like this, which I find really fascinating. Another case I want to talk about, I won't have time to talk about all the cases in this book, but this is a really interesting one. This lady is Connie Lopez. I worked with her for many years. Somebody bought me a little alien figure one day of a gray. I put it on my desk. And she comes up and screams and says, oh my God, what's that? And I'm like, well, what do you think it is? And she says, I don't know what it is, but I saw one of those right after I had my son. He was 2 weeks old. I'm like, okay, tell me about it. I knew she wasn't lying. I'd worked with her for a while. I don't really advertise my UFO research at work, but it does get out. So she told me this incredible story. This was in a suburb outside of Los Angeles, and she had just had her child, her son, 2 weeks earlier, and he was sleeping next to the big picture window in their master bedroom because she wanted to keep an eye on him. Well, she wakes up to hear this squeaky sound, like someone rubbing their finger on glass, like doing dishes or something, and wakes up and gets the single biggest shock of her life. There is a gray-type ET standing in front of the picture window, which is a very large window actually, looking down at her baby and at the mobile above it, and down at her baby again, and it's trying to open the window. It has little octopus-like suction cups on its fingers, lining them up and down. A rare detail, but I've heard it before. Don't hear it a lot. And she said it was about 6 feet tall, large, dark eyes, huge head, hairless, no apparent jumpsuit. Pretty typical description of a gray, for the most part, except for those suction cups on its fingers. And here's the weird part. It's trying to open this window. It's rubbing it back and forth, and this window doesn't open. It has no latches. It doesn't open. It's fixed to the wall. And I don't know why this ET didn't remember that you guys can walk through walls, and what are you doing? But it was trying to open the window, and seemed very interested in her baby. So she sits up and is getting ready to scream and grab her baby, when it looks right at her, they lock gazes, and it slams her back to the mattress. And she's paralyzed and unable to speak out. And she can feel her tears pouring out of her eyes as this ET continues to try to open the window for about 2 minutes. Finally just gives up and walks away. She instantly breaks out of this paralysis, runs over, scoops up her baby, screaming, wakes up her husband, and he's very understanding, but he thinks she had a nightmare. And she's like, no, it was no nightmare. That morning she left. She went to stay with her mothers for the next 2 weeks. When they got back, she's like, we're getting dogs. And they got 2 guard dogs. But that wasn't enough. They ended up selling the house. She's like, I can't live here anymore. So it's her one and only encounter. She's never had encounters before. The son, who was the target of interest, does not remember it obviously, and has not had any encounters. So it's one of those weird sort of random cases. Hard to make sense of. It doesn't really fit the pattern. But what it does betray, I think, is the ET's interest in reproduction. I've got many cases in my files in which people have been visited when they're 7 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant, or just had their baby. It happened to my own sister, actually. She just had her baby and this UFO showed up. She couldn't wake up anyone around her in the house. A typical type of encounter. This next case is actually the cover story of the book. This gentleman, Harry Williams, lives in Vandalia, Ohio, and had basically some very close-up sightings much of his life, and missing time as well. And one evening, was driving with his wife. This was back in 1985, and he sees this object right next to the road. He says, at a big picture window, you can see the 2 little gray ETs. They were operating the ship. He was 20, 50 feet away, and he says these guys just looked straight at him, and he looked right back at him, and he said they just seemed super intelligent and looked right through him. And he turns to his wife and says, look, honey, aliens. And she's like, no, I'm not looking. She did not want to look. She was not happy about it. She's like, let's get out of here. She's screaming, let's get out of here. Finally, she convinces him to get out of here. And this object follows them all the way home. He slows down, it slows down. He speeds up, it speeds up. Follows him all the way home. He screeches into the driveway. The wife makes a beeline for the front door. And he's screaming for everyone else in the house, come out, look at the UFO. And they come rushing out, and the UFO instantly goes way up high so you can't see the ET, but you can still see it quite clearly. Hovers there for a few moments, and then suddenly everyone forgets they're seeing a UFO, and they walk into the house. Weird, but this sort of thing happens quite a bit. People just get turned off somehow. They forget that they're actually having an encounter. But he remembers it vividly. Some of the people who saw this did not remember it. Following this incident, he said he would wake up in the morning, go to his job as a car mechanic, and they'd be there. They'd be hovering way up high above the house, and as soon as he'd get out, they'd swoop down and follow him to work. And then they'd rise up again. And when he got off work, they'd come swooping down and follow him home. So it must have happened 30, 40, 50 times. And continues to happen. And he got to the point where he would go out at night and he'd see, gosh, that looks like a UFO. And he'd point at it and or he'd say, is that a UFO? And it would come dropping down out of the sky right over his head. He went running inside when this happened to tell his wife, and she says, there's a UFO outside, it's right there. And she reminded him gently that she doesn't like to talk about UFOs and would not go look. He says, he's now an elderly man. He says he enjoys excellent health, and he feels it's a result of his ET contacts. He doesn't remember actually going on board, but he's had missing time enough times where he feels it's definitely a possibility. When his mom was on her deathbed, she revealed that she had had a very close-up encounter where this UFO chased her car just like he had been reporting. It's like, Mom, why didn't you tell me? She says, well, you know, I didn't want to talk about it. Again, something I hear, but this sort of thing is definitely generational. This is one of my favorite cases in the book. This involves a gentleman by the name of Jen Cubalc. He's an electronics engineer and was stationed aboard the USS Valley Forge back in 1960. He was part of the submarine squadron, trained to identify aircraft, a very highly trained, scientifically minded individual, and is out at sea on the USS Valley Forge in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea when these UFOs show up. And they're very bright yellow objects, way off on the horizon, he's estimating, but very large, and they're pulsating in a strange way. They're not normal lights. It says as soon as you look slightly away, you can't see them at all in your peripheral vision. You have to look directly at them to see them. They weren't emitting any light themselves, but were very, very bright, which is another strange detail. So obviously these are not normal lights. He calls up the bridge and asks them, you know, about these lights that they're looking at. And they deny seeing any UFOs. They say, you know, we don't see anything. We don't know what you're talking about. Gave him the runaround. He finally hung up. Went below deck to get some more witnesses and get his binoculars. He had bought binoculars when he was on a shore leave. And as he's opening his locker and pulling up this box, his crewmates start laughing at him and says, oh, Cubalc going to find out he bought some rocks. A number of them got ripped off and they bought packages at foreign ports. And he opens up his box and pulls out two brand new pair of binoculars and says, ha, you know, come on deck, look, you gotta come on deck, there's UFOs. And he convinces about a dozen people to go onto the deck of this ship and look at these UFOs. This is an actual picture of the USS Valley Forge around that time. They all rush up on deck and they're looking at these lights through the binoculars and are still not able to identify it. He's completely freaking out. He calls up the bridge again and says, we're seeing UFOs, you've got to be seeing this. And the bridge officer says, listen, we're much too busy to talk, you're going to have to call back later. You know, first he said, well, there's no one up here, no one here for you to talk to, which is obviously impossible. The bridge is always full of people. Then he says, you know, we can't talk to you, we're too busy. So again, gave him the runaround. He returns back and watches these objects for almost an hour before the ship suddenly turns, obviously in response to these objects that won't go away. And as soon as the ship turns, the objects drop off one by one and they're gone. And that's it. The next day, you know, he goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, checks the news sheet that's published every day, expecting to hear about this sighting. There's nothing. He calls up the bridge, and he said, you know, I called you guys twice. And they said, we have no record of your call. He says, well, what about those objects? And they're like, what objects? He says, well, can I talk to the officer? And he gives the name of the guy he spoke to. And he said, oh, well, he's no longer on the ship. He's on shore leave. He just went. And now, mind you, they're in the middle of the Mediterranean. No one gets shore leave when you're in the middle of the Mediterranean. So he knew they were on, but didn't push it. As the day progresses, he goes to his locker, and he opens his locker, and his crewmates start laughing at him. And they say, oh, Cubalc's going to find out he bought some rocks. He's like, what are you talking about? And they said, you probably bought some rocks. You thought you got binoculars. And he looks at them and was like, well, no, I have binoculars. You were up on deck with me last night watching UFOs, remember? No, they don't remember. He asks the next guy, no, I wasn't up there. But he asks a number of people, and none of these guys remember watching these UFOs, except one. One guy has, oh yeah, I do remember seeing something. So this really bothered him a lot. To me, this is an indication of a more extensive encounter. And so I wasn't surprised to hear him tell me that there was more to this story. He couldn't remember it at first. It wasn't until he was falling asleep that night that suddenly it came rushing back into his head what he calls, quote, a dream, but telling me at the same time that this was no dream. It was much different from any of his other dreams and was very vivid. And he feels like he made contact with whoever was in those lights and that perhaps he was taken on board. Because what he remembers is a very detailed encounter of being in this place, this room, surrounded by civilians, or what looked like human-looking people. And they were telling him about energy and alternative energy sources. They were interested in his ability as a scientist to understand inventions and alternative energy sources. And they proceeded to hold a very long conversation about how humanity has evolved their technology over the centuries from horse-drawn carts to fossil fuels, and told him that you've got to move on from fossil fuels, and that there's a lot more energy sources out there, like electromagnetics, and all this sort of thing. They were very big on that's magnetics and electromagnetics. And they said that the only thing that's holding us back is our own limitations, that we don't think we can do it, when in fact there's all these alternative energy sources all over the place that are free for the taking, from water to air to solar and others. And they proceeded to take him to what looked like an engine room. And this again is something I've heard many times. People are taken after perhaps an examination, that's the most common thing, but they're taken to see an engine room, or they're given messages. Sometimes it's warnings of future disasters, like Kevin described. Other times it's healing or spiritual messages, or things about psychic development even, or past lives, this sort of thing. Alternative healing is pretty big, actually. But on this occasion, they were talking about alternative energy. And they showed him this engine that was not plugged into any power source. And he's like, how could this possibly work? And they said, well, you're contradicting yourself. Already, we just told you there are alternative streams of energy all over the place. And they basically told him how the thing worked, which was through capturing electromagnetic energy. And they gave him plans, or kind of put into his head, how he could build this sort of perpetual motion device, or free energy machine. And this is all he really recalled. His duty on the ship ended. The last thing he did was talk to some of the guys who remembered seeing these objects. And one of them comes up to him and says, you know, the weirdest thing wasn't those UFOs we saw. I had some really strange dreams that night. And he regrets to this day not talking more about that, because he's thinking, you know, perhaps that they had a similar experience that he did. Years later, he goes home, tells his family about the experience, and tells them, you know, they gave me plans on how to build this thing. And they're like, well, do it. And so he does. He goes to a hardware store, gets a bicycle wheel, buys a bunch of magnets and all this stuff, and puts together this sort of, he was kind of embarrassed about it, had a hard time getting the whole story out of him. But he described this sort of perpetual motion device. And once he got it spinning, spun for a good 2-3 weeks. Then he put it back in the garage and refused to talk about it. But it's a very interesting case and sort of typifies, again, what I think the ET agenda is. They're very interested in alternative energy. The next case I want to talk about is a housewife from Nebraska. back in 1992, she had a baby, and afterwards became very sick with what appeared to be a hypoglycemia-type illness. She lost a bunch of weight, got very, very weak, and started passing out throughout the day several times. She'd have to eat to get her blood sugar up, and would pass out afterwards. Went to the doctor, thought perhaps she had diabetes, it runs in her family. They said, no, it's not hypoglycemia, we don't know what it is. It just got worse and worse, though, to the point where she was really frightened for her life and started sleeping next to her husband on the floor. Normally she did not do this because he was a very loud snorer, and they slept in separate rooms. But she was frightened at this point that she might not wake up from one of these episodes, and is walking across the room to lay down next to her husband, when suddenly she is not in her room anymore, in her house. She's in something that looks like this. An underground area. It had a large, vast chamber, a domed ceiling. It was very bright, but there was no actual lights that she could see. It was as if the walls glowed. Again, a detail I've heard many times. She said there was an industrial carpet on the floor, and she was inside one of these cubicles, and there was hundreds of them. There was a gentleman right across from her. He was dazed, as was she, and they're looking at each other, and he says, I'm Cooper. She says, well, I'm Jill. That's not her real name. And they started talking, small talk, and trying to get grips to what's going on, trying to figure out where they are and how they got there. But she felt strangely sedate. Next thing she knows, this figure is bounding down the corridor towards her. Cooper passes out on his table and is no longer conscious, and this figure is looking right at her, comes up to her, and she starts screaming because this thing is 9 feet tall. She says it was at least 9 feet tall. It was human-ish, human-looking, kind of, but had a very broad face, a huge chin, enormous forehead, very large human-like eyes, but it was this hair, which was most strange. It wasn't hair. It was 2-inch long straw, orange straw, which stuck straight out. She's really baffled by this figure. She feels it was not human, but has never heard of anything like the figure she saw. And when she contacted me, that's why she contacted me. She wanted to know, have I ever heard of anything like this? I have to say, no, I really haven't. There is a strange uniqueness to a lot of these ET encounters that it's hard to classify, and hers is certainly one of those cases. And this figure turns to her and says, it's your turn now, Jill. And that sends her over the edge. She starts screaming. It takes its cape, wraps her body up in it, takes these bell-like metallic devices and starts putting them under the cape over her various areas on her body. And it starts sending out these pulses of energy, which is actually quite painful. And she's thinking, okay, it's over, I'm dead. What's going on? I'm an experiment on a guinea pig, obviously. And starts screaming in holy terror, and that's the last thing she remembers except waking up and she's standing in the middle of her living room again. And she starts running through the house, trying to wake up her husband and her children. They won't wake up. It takes her 20 minutes to wake them up, and they come out of their sleep as if they were anesthetized. And husband's completely supportive. He thinks that this did happen to her, but he doesn't know what to think of it. But is very supportive of her. She's lucky in that regard. And she has no idea what just happened, but she's very sore. Her body is sore for over a week. And it wasn't until the next day when she realized she hadn't passed out. Not once. And the next day she didn't pass out either. She immediately started gaining weight. The pain went away, and her illness went away. She now feels that she was healed by these guys, but she has no idea why. She's like, Preston, I'm just a housewife from Nebraska. My husband's nobody important. And I asked if she had military in her family or any connections to the intelligence community or anything. There's no indication as to why she had this experience, other than she did admit to having experiences as a child. She says as a child, she woke up once and she saw these 3-foot tall teddy bears coming through the wall. And suddenly they transformed to grays, and they were very angry. They wanted to know why she had put tinfoil on her windows. And she said, I didn't, Mom did. And they're like, well, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And she said, to keep out the heat. And the aliens did not believe her and asked again, why? Why did you do that? And she says, to keep out the heat. And they kept asking her, thinking she was lying. She kept saying, no, this is why. And finally they just gave up and asked her to get a glass of water for them. They set up this black box in the center of the room and started pouring the glasses of water that she gave to them into this thing. It's another weird thing I've heard before. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what this black box is, but I've heard it before. And this went on for quite some time. And so that was an early childhood experience. And from like age 8 to 12, she says they came once a week or so. And they told her when she's ready to have an experience with them, what she needs to do is fold up her blanket and put it at the base of the bed. And they'll come and get her and take her and teach her stuff. And this is what she says happened, but the frustrating part, she says, is she can't remember anything except being taken. She does not know what they taught her, but she feels like it was this secret knowledge of some sort. And she later had other encounters. She had one encounter in which she remembered being taken on board this, apparently a craft. There was a rubber matting on the ground. It reminded her of a bath mat. It was black. There were human kind of hybrid grays on board. They looked at her and they took her to show her her child. And they said, this is your child. And she became overcome with love and wanted to hold this child and take it home. But the child said, no, I can't go with you. My place is here. And it was a relatively brief incident. She was returned back to her home, and that was basically it, except the next morning, her son says, Mom, I went to the moon last night. He was 5 years old. She said, you did? She said, yeah, I went on a spaceship and they took me to the moon. And that freaked her out. For her, that was some weird corroboration. She went to the doctor, because as a child, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis and had to have x-rays on a semi-yearly basis, once every couple of years. And went to get her chest x-rayed, and the doctor called her back in and says, oh my God, you know, what is this? In one of her lungs was a metallic ring about the size of a keychain. She says, I don't know what that is. She says, do you have any idea how that got there? She says, no, I really don't. And this object is still in her lungs. It's been in there for a couple of years now. It's got calcified a little bit over it, but it does not appear to be harming her. And she says, one thing I would like to mention is that right before I started getting sick, right before I had this hypoglycemia illness, she was vacuuming the floor when suddenly she felt something in her nose and it fell out. And she looked and it was this little metallic spool. She's like, wow, that's weird. And she kind of just tossed it aside. Realized suddenly, oh my God, and then couldn't find it. But she does feel it was related. Okay, I want to talk about one last case. This is probably one of the more intense cases in the book, involving a man by the name of, I call him Kenneth. And as a child, he began having severe nosebleeds to the point where his parents rushed him to the doctors. Doctors, well, we don't know what's wrong. Here's a vitamin cocktail. That's all we can do. Sent him home. He didn't tell his parents, but at this time he was seeing little figures in his room. They were running around at night. He couldn't see them clearly because his room was very dark in the back of the house. But he could sometimes hear them actually talking as well. And didn't know what to make of it because it stopped around age 9. As a young man, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure and Crohn's disease. He went to the doctor once and they were like, you've got this weird object in your sinus. Do you have any idea how that got in there? Or what it is? Did you stick a pencil off your nose or anything? Like, no, I have no idea what it is. In 1991, at age 25, he was a medical assistant, driving home from work with his friend who was a nurse, and this is in upstate New York, when they see this orb, this ball of light. And it gets really close to their car, and the car conks out, and the lights don't work, the engine's off. The nurse gets very freaked out. She does not know what's going on. And he's very interested and wants to see more, but finally they just drive off. And when they get home, they find out that it's 2 hours later than it should be. They're completely disturbed by this. Their clock, the car's clock is 2 hours behind, as well as both their watches. So there's this weird time missing at this point. And they don't know what to make of it. They get to work the next day, and there's all this talk about these UFOs. Apparently the whole neighborhood saw all these UFOs that night. Like, did you see the UFOs? And I'm like, yeah, I think we saw something. They did not want to talk about it. He started having dreams at this point of that incident, and in the dreams, he saw gray-type ETs approaching his car. And he had not really heard of UFOs at this point, wasn't into it, did not want to face it, actually preferred denial, so refused to face the fact that he was having encounters, despite the fact that this started happening every couple of years. He would see these orbs of light, and he would have missing time. And often he'd wake up the next morning, and he'd have these burns on his body, or triangular marks. This started to cause him a lot of distress. Once he went to go visit his friends at a bar, and he arrives there, and it's almost 1 or 2 a.m. And they're like, well, we're leaving now. Where were you? He says, well, I drove straight here. Did not remember seeing a UFO or anything. But went home, woke up with feeling horrible and having these burns on his body, and later started having dreams where he saw this ball of light approaching him. This got to be just too much. He decides, I'm moving, I'm going to Florida. And finds a job down in Florida, and still has the same problems. He is driving along when he sees this UFO. He pulls up to his house, and he's like, are you the one that's been following me? He's talking to this object, and it flares up all these bright rainbow colors. And the next thing he knows, he's waking up. His door is wide open. His dog is severely traumatized. Part of his sideburns are missing, and he's got a severe sunburn. His neighbor actually woke him up saying, oh my God, you look horrible. What's going on? Your dog is loose. The door is wide open. You could be robbed blind. He's like, I don't know what's going on. About a year later, his friend was over when he decides, okay, I'm going to take the dog for a walk. And the friend's like, okay. And they open the door, and there's this orb. And his friend jumps up and says, I have to go. And rushes to his car and takes off. And that's all he remembers, except waking up the next day, and his clothes are missing. They're on the ground next to him, all scattered. He's nude. His dog is again completely traumatized, and the house is full of so many bugs it takes him, over a day to clean out. And he's like, okay, I'm moving back to New York. So he goes to New York, and this was around, 2003. Or no, 2006, I'm sorry. He has another encounter. Same type of thing, sees this ball of light, wakes up and has bruises and marks on his body. At this point, he finally seeks out a therapist who says, after working with him for some time, he says, I think you're having UFO encounters, you need to see a UFO specialist. He's like, okay. He finally admits that he is. But he's very reluctant to go under hypnosis and has not done so. During this time, he started hearing them in his head. They would talk to him and say, we are coming. We will be coming soon. All your answers will be, all your questions will be answered. All will be revealed. And he would hear this periodically. He tried to talk to him, nothing. But this message would come over and over again. And then something else started happening, this weird development. He'd walk by people and start seeing their aura. And he'd hear these aliens, he's presuming, in his head, in a chorus. And they'd say, "You have a job to do." And he felt compelled, as if he was almost possessed, to walk up to these people and give them psychic readings. He says he could not believe he was doing this. He did not know where the knowledge was coming from. But the ETs would say, "You have a job to do," and he'd do it. Walked up to this one lady. He says, "Go home. Your husband needs to see you." She was about to go out for the evening. He says, "No, I really think you should go home to your husband." And she did. And he never saw her for years. Usually he doesn't see these people again. But saw her at a grocery store. She comes running over to him in line, out of her line to his. Says, "You're that man, aren't you? You're that man who told me to go home." She's like, "Yeah, I remember you." She says, "Well, I want to thank you because I had a wonderful night with my husband that night, and he went to bed and died in his sleep." And so he's had this going on, he says, 20 or 30 or 40 times he's been compelled to give these psychic readings. And usually he does not know what happens. He tells people, "Oh, check your brakes," or "You should go to the doctor, there's something wrong with your liver," and things like this. And it's these ETs who are doing it through him, he feels. He has a hard time with these encounters, does not like them. But in 2006, it all came to a head. They kept saying, "We are coming. It won't be long. We are coming very soon." He was driving home, and suddenly he sees this ball of light, and suddenly his phone rings, his cell phone, and it's making weird tones. It's set actually to a song. It can't make these tones. And he looks at the phone, and the line's dead. Starts ringing again, or making these weird tones. And so he answers it, and says, or he looks at it and says, no such number, but he answers it. And he starts hearing these weird clicking noises. This is like someone pressing the tongue to the top of their mouth, and something like that. It buzzes, and then suddenly he hears a voice, and it says, "The time has grown closer," and it hangs up. And it's the ETs, he feels, and I know how this sounds, ETs calling on the phone, like really. But this happened to Betty Andreasen, whose case was investigated by Raymond Fowler. She had a series of calls like this. This happened to Bud Hopkins' client, Debbie Jordan. This has happened actually to a number of people. John Keel talks about this as well. Actually, to think about it, it's not that surprising because ETs are able to affect all kinds of technology, all kinds of machines, electromagnetic machines, including television, radios. Whitley Strieber talks about how he heard an alien voice talking through his stereo. There's another case like that in Colorado. So yeah, I cover this in depth in my other book, not from here, but this happened to Kenneth. And it was a couple of days later. They said, "It's time." He's lying in bed and says, It's time for you to know why. We haven't come to harm you, but you need to know why." And this is when they appeared around his bed. He was fully conscious. He says it started to get really screwy. The next thing he knows, he's not in his room anymore. He doesn't remember being taken on board. He was no longer in his bedroom. He was on board this UFO. And they said, "You needed to know why we took you. Well, here is why." And they showed him what appeared to be a half ET, half human child, a boy. He became enraged, very upset. He turned to them and said, "How dare you? You have no permission to do this." And they said, "Well, we do have permission. You needed to know why we contacted you." "Well, this is why. This is your child." He's like, "Well, how could you? I did not agree to this." And they said, "Well, this is your child. Don't you love it?" And he says, "Well, yeah, I do." And he did. He felt a lot of love for this child. But at the same time, he felt utterly repulsed by it. It was not human looking, and he was not ready for this, and could not handle it. The ETs, however, seemed very, very proud and kind of looked at him with an expression of, well, not an expression, but a feeling of pride. And that's the impression that he got from them. But they told him flat out, "We have not come to harm you, and this is why we contacted you. And like a number of other witnesses in this book and other people I've talked to, he's also having a series of dreams in which he feels there's going to be an apocalyptic type event in our society, which the water is not drinkable and the air has been poisoned and this sort of thing. I've heard this several times. But again, this speaks, I think, towards the ET agenda. Why are they contacting people? What happens when someone's taken on board is usually they're physically examined. But beyond that, they're given messages in one of these three areas, whether it's alternative energy or warnings of environmental destruction or messages about spirituality or healing. And this is what I'm running across in case after case. I always ask people, do you think these guys are evil? You know, do you think they're hostile? Are they going to take over our planet? And almost nobody I've talked to says that. The worst stories I get are people who feel like they were treated like a lab rat. That's what the housewife felt. She says, these guys just kind of looked down on me, had no regard for my feelings. But I get no cases of what I would call sadism or torture or aliens hurting people for fun, or extremely few, I should say. It would be, I think, much easier for me to prove that humanity is hostile than to prove that ETs are hostile. I think their behavior falls under the same umbrella as human behavior, but it's skewed slightly more towards the positive. For the most part, they do seem to be laissez-faire in people's affairs, but most of the people I talk to do feel like there is going to be an escalation of encounters and that our future is going to involve open official contact. And I'm guessing it'll happen as soon as this whole disclosure movement breaks wide open, which I don't think is going to be very long. But that's basically that book, and I've got a few other slides I can breeze through here. I don't want to keep you too late.
Preston, was that a gray human hybrid there?
Yes. Yeah.
Are all these hybrids the greatest, like you know?
Yeah. In my research, definitely. I would say most of the people I talk to see some version of the grays. And when someone has half, feel like they've got an ET offspring, or were taken on board and shown babies and told it's theirs, yeah, it's usually half gray, half human, or a measure of human. But I want to talk a little bit about, not from here, just briefly. I have a chapter in there about what happens if you shoot at a UFO. I can tell you it's not a good idea. Usually they won't shoot back, but in some cases they do. In no cases did someone actually bring down a UFO. There's one case, very interesting, where a farmer saw his rabbits being stolen. He grabs his rifle and starts to shoot them, and the rifle becomes so heavy he can't lift it, and it drops to the ground, and he's paralyzed, and they take his rabbits and they go off. Another case, these people saw a UFO in their backyard. He runs out with his rifle and to shoot at them, and he sees the actual figures coming down out of the object. Next thing he knows, it's the next morning. He and his wife are in bed, and they wake up, and the rifle is on the kitchen table, and it's completely dismantled, all spread out across the table. Or maybe there's a message there. There's another chapter in this book called Alien Zoos. Of course, many people have seen animals being taken, but there are a number of cases where people are taken on board a UFO, and this is what they see. It happened to Betty Andreasen. It happened to one witness I talked to. It happened to a family in Oregon who were contactees, another real estate broker in Oregon. These people who are shown these things see not only human animals, elk and elephant and cows and rabbits, but non-human animals, which are variously described as sometimes primates, cat-like creatures, and they have very difficulty describing them, horse-like creatures, and this sort of thing. One chapter is about UFOs that hover over graveyards. This shocked me. I have a number of my own cases. Apparently this is a thing. Raymond Fowler has cases. J. Allen Hynek has a case like this, where a couple drove up to a cemetery and they saw this fog over the cemetery and they were like, that's weird, and there was this UFO. And as they get close, suddenly The husband goes to wave at it, and his hand gets stuck to the roof of the car, and he's paralyzed. And they can't move, the car is disabled until this UFO takes off. And it's not just sightings, I'll tell you, there are landings in these graveyards. There's a case in West Virginia where people had so many encounters over a graveyard, they actually were able to go there and predict sightings. And UFOs would land there and the graves would be disturbed. So I think we're dealing with a case of alien grave robbers, which is macabre, I know, but they're all about genetics. I think that may be what they're doing. I really don't know. Another researcher, Scott Corrales, noticed this pattern. He mentioned maybe they're retrieving implants. I don't know, but there's not only cases of sightings and landings, but several cases involving humanoids as well. Another chapter is called Aliens Among Us. They are walking among us. People have seen ETs in the most unlikely places. At school, at gas stations, on the subway, at hotels, in casinos. Often they're described as being wrapped up in scarves and sunglasses and hats, and so you can't really see them. A very well-known case was described by Whitley Strieber, in which the editor of his book, Bruce Lee, not the karate guy, an editor, came into the bookstore in New York City to see the display of communion and came upon this couple which was standing in front of the display reading the book at super high speed. He goes up to them and they turn to him and they're not human. He says they were not human. They had huge almond eyes. He gave him a very angry look and he got out of there as fast as he could. Told his wife, those people aren't human. He was very upset apparently when the story leaked out. Another chapter is UFOs that hover over mines. I can tell you they are stealing our metal. Hands down, they are. They're seen over copper mines, over iron mines, uranium mines, diamond mines, you name it. Several cases in all the states that I've done research on, from New York, Arizona, California, and others. So I'm pretty sure that there's quite a number of cases like this. And I collected about 30 and put them together. Not From Here follows up on the same book. These are all articles I wrote over the years and updated. I found out many researchers are having contact with UFOs. Bud Hopkins, of course, saw one. Brad Steiger had contact with ETs. Ed Conroy, when he started investigating Whitley Strieber, his case, became an abductee himself. Raymond Fowler turned out, yep, he had onboard encounters, as did Leo Sprinkle. So I think a lot of major researchers, and I've talked to some who aren't going public, but you would know them, who have had face-to-face encounters with ETs. Barbara Lamb has said as much, and I know a number of other researchers who have as well. I've had some limited things, but nothing, I've never been taken on board that I'm aware of. I'll just go through these last few real fast. This is a case in which people were told that, a number of cases, people are told that ETs and we are related, and that we come from the same genetic stock. A number of people have been told that ETs are us from the future, but they went through a disaster and their genetics were destroyed, and this is why the whole breeding program is going on, and that in fact greys are not greys at all, they're humans, but have had severe genetic damage. It's definitely a possibility. There's another chapter involving angel hair, which is a very rare substance ejected from UFOs. There hasn't been a whole lot of studies on this, and they still don't know exactly what it is. It appears to be a byproduct of their engines. There's one chapter on which people have been rescued at sea by a UFO. This happens very rarely. I only found a couple of cases, but I found it was interesting enough to do a study on. A number of cases in which people have seen ETs collecting plants. There's this great case I'll mention where this lady and this husband were approached by their neighbors who said, there was a UFO hovering over your house last night. Like, oh, really? Okay, we know it. A couple of days later, she hears this noise in the backyard and looks and sees these gray-type ETs stripping the leaves off of her philodendron. And she's like, hey, hey, and they run away. A couple of days later, they're back, and they strip all the leaves off before he like chases them away. But this is very common. I mean, there was a farmer in France who was missing his lavender flowers and wondering who was stealing them. It turns out it was ETs. So yeah, they're collecting all kinds of plants. There are cases in which people are told to go into pools of water and made to breathe the water, the UFO breathing pool. It's a very rare procedure, but it does happen. I talked a little bit about a similar incident which happened to one of the witnesses in the book. There's a chapter on the study of UFO odors, which I wanted to include because you hear almost nothing about this. I collected over 50 cases, and the odors can be broken down into two categories, organic and inorganic. Some people describe metallic odors or ozone-like odors or electrical odors, which I think points to the fact that we're dealing with machines here, metallic machines that operate on electromagnetism. But a number of people have described organic odors, which are almost universally described as not good, kind of funky or smelly or cheesy. One lady told me, I smell franks and beans. I'm like, no, really? And then when I read it again, I'm like, oh God, here we go. Okay, I only got one report where it smelled like chicken, so I'm going to throw that one out. But yeah, a lot of organic odors, which I think speaks towards the possibility that we're dealing with organic beings. A number of people have been given alien drinks, which seem to have various purposes, either for healing or for medical purposes, or for perhaps it's a Rohypnol type thing where they're erasing your memory. So that does seem to be something that does occur. I did a study of cases where UFOs are observing rocket launches, and I can tell you that they are watching all our rocket launches, have been for years. It started out at the White Sands, continued at China Lake and Edwards, and many, many cases like this to the present day. In fact, if you go on the internet and look at some of these latest launches of Russian and Chinese satellites, you can actually see these UFOs that come up and circle around them and go off into the distance. And the officials never release a decent explanation as to what's going on. But it's very clear that something is. And I found actually a couple of cases where they're so interested in observing our traveling into space that they have approached toy rocket launches. There was a case in New York where a father was launching toy rockets with his sons. And they launched these rockets and the UFOs showed up. Another guy in Nevada, he puts a little lizard in his toy rocket, shoots it off, UFO comes zooming in to check it out. So this is how close they're watching us. And that is basically my lecture tonight. I want to thank you all very much.